Imagine stepping into a grand medieval hall. The long tables are crowded with nobles, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat, burning torches, and the faint tang of spilled ale. Laughter bounces off stone walls, mingling with the clatter of silverware. In the center of it all is a figure that seems out of place, small, brightly dressed, bells jingling with every movement, a painted smile on their face. To the casual eye, this is a jester, a bringer of joy, a source of endless amusement, the life of the medieval court. But beneath the painted grin lies a story far more complex, far more perilous than we often imagine. The life of a medieval jester was not a whimsical existence of carefree entertainment. It was a life defined by survival, by constant negotiation with power, by walking a razor-thin line between humor and offense, between favor and disaster. Many people today assume that jesters were simply entertainers, similar to modern comedians or circus performers. Yet their position in medieval society was much more precarious. The jester's livelihood depended entirely on the whims of a monarch or noble. If the king found a joke dull, if a noble took offense, if the queen grew tired of the performance, the jester could be dismissed without warning and sometimes even punished. Unlike a modern performer who might leave the stage and return another night, medieval jesters existed within an ecosystem of absolute authority where one mistake could prove catastrophic. There were no unions, no contracts, no safety nets. Every gesture, every word, every joke had consequences that could ripple far beyond the hall. The skills required of a jester were formidable. Many were accomplished musicians, capable of playing multiple instruments, often simultaneously while performing acrobatics or reciting verse. Some were master storytellers, able to spin intricate narratives that entertained while subtly commenting on politics or human folly. A jester might juggle objects, tumble across the floor, mimic the gestures of nobles, or improvise songs that drew laughter from the court. Their physical dexterity was matched only by their mental acuity. They needed to read the room constantly, to sense the mood of the court, to adapt their humor to avoid offense while maximizing amusement. It was a combination of artistry, wit, and diplomacy that few could master. Yet, mastery did not guarantee safety or respect. Jesters were often expected to mock themselves, to expose their own flaws and weaknesses in the pursuit of entertainment. They became the court's human safety valve, absorbing ridicule, deflecting tension, and serving as the repository for jokes that no one else could tell. They might mimic their own deformities, exaggerate their own ugliness, or craft self-deprecating humor that made nobles laugh while subtly reminding them of the jester's expendability. In essence, they were professional victims of laughter, forced to convert humiliation into amusement. The irony is stark. The person who seemed the most powerful in the room, holding the king's attention and shaping the mood, was often the most vulnerable. Some of the most skilled jesters were highly educated. They might be multilingual, familiar with literature, history, and politics, able to craft jokes that required deep knowledge to fully appreciate. In many ways, the jester was a rare combination of entertainer and counselor. Monarchs often relied on jesters for insights they could not obtain elsewhere. A clever jest might illuminate the folly of a noble's decision or reveal weaknesses in a rival's strategy. Yet even with this subtle influence, the jester's position remained unstable. A joke that amused one day could provoke anger the next. The same skill that gave them survival could just as easily invite disaster. The life of a jester was also defined by physical hardship. Unlike the nobles who dined and lounged, the jester's body was a tool, constantly tested. Juggling, dancing, acrobatics, and mimicry required stamina and endurance. Performances could last for hours, often in drafty halls with uneven floors, while the jester endured cold, hunger, and exhaustion. Injuries were common. A fall during a complex maneuver could result in weeks of pain with no compensation, yet these hardships were accepted as part of the profession, often masked by the ever-present smile and jingling bells. To the court, the jester was a source of delight. Behind the laughter lay a reality of relentless labor and vulnerability. Socially, jesters occupied a peculiar space. They were neither servants nor equals. They were visible yet invisible, essential yet marginal. They lived alongside the powerful, but rarely shared in the privileges of wealth or respect. Their meals might be simple, their sleeping quarters modest, yet they performed for those whose wealth and comfort were beyond imagination. Relationships within the court were often transactional. Allies could be temporary, friendships fleeting, and trust rare. The jester depended on charm, skill, and timing to maintain their position, aware that a single misstep could result in exile or punishment. The psychological demands were immense. Constant vigilance was required, as the jester had to monitor every expression, every murmur, every flicker of emotion. They needed to anticipate offense and temper it with humor, balance wit with tact, and navigate court intrigue with skill. Mistakes could be more than humiliating, they could be deadly. Jesters walked a fine line, their survival dependent on acute observation, rapid improvisation, and unerring instinct. The stress of such a life is almost unimaginable to us today, yet it was their daily reality. Even in moments of triumph, the jester's life was defined by impermanence. A performance that brought roars of laughter might guarantee favor for a time, yet there was never certainty. Monarchs were capricious, noble audiences fickle, and the court's mood could shift in an instant. The jester's success was fragile, contingent, and fleeting. Every joke, every acrobatic flourish, every clever song was both an opportunity and a risk. The laughter they inspired was a shield, but one that could never fully protect them from the hazards of their world. There was also a moral and emotional burden inherent in the role. Jesters were often required to mock the suffering of others, to make light of situations that were grave, tragic, or unjust. They might perform songs that satirized war, poverty, or illness, transforming human misery into entertainment. This required a dissonance of mind and spirit, the ability to convert empathy into amusement, to laugh while recognizing the underlying pain. It was a skill few could sustain without cost, and many jesters struggled with the emotional toll of their work. Despite all these challenges, the position offered rare privileges. Few others could speak truths to power. Jesters had a unique license to comment on the actions of rulers, often disguised as jokes. They could illuminate folly, critique decisions, and observe human behavior in ways that others could not. But this privilege was fraught with danger. Misreading the monarch's sense of humor could result in punishment or exile, and even clever jesters sometimes faced violence or disgrace. The freedom to speak was always conditional, a fragile gift that required careful handling. Some jesters rose to fame and influence, but these cases were exceptional. A successful jester could amass wealth, develop influence within the court, and even enjoy a degree of protection. Yet such success required relentless skill, constant vigilance, and a keen understanding of human behavior. For the majority, life remained a precarious balancing act, with survival dependent on charm, talent, and timing. The jester's journey was one of constant adaptation, where failure was not an option and the stakes were extraordinarily high. In essence, the medieval jester embodied the paradox of visibility and vulnerability. They were central to court life, shaping moods and providing entertainment, yet they remained marginal, dependent, and exposed. Their laughter was demanded, their skill admired, but their status precarious. They were human performers in a world ruled by caprice, required to be brilliant, resilient, and endlessly adaptable. The painted smile and jingling bells masked a life of discipline, danger, and uncertainty. To understand the jester is to understand a key aspect of medieval society, the interplay of power, entertainment, and survival. Jesters were mirrors, reflecting both the absurdities and the cruelties of the court. They were entertainers, advisors, and human shields, all rolled into one. Yet their world was perilous, their lives often brief, their triumphs fragile. Behind the laughter and color lay a story of hardship, strategy, and extraordinary resilience. The life of a medieval jester was far from easy. It was a constant negotiation between amusement and survival, wit and danger, skill and peril. In the grand halls of kings and queens, where laughter echoed off stone walls, where nobles feasted and joked, the jester moved among them, balancing performance and self-preservation with every step. Each bell that jingled, each acrobatic leap, each clever word was both a gift to the court and a tool of survival. Their existence was precarious, their labor relentless, their role uniquely human in its blend of artistry, intellect, and courage. To be a jester was to live in the intersection of light and shadow, humor and danger, laughter and fear. And yet, it was precisely in this paradoxical space that the medieval jester carved out a life, one defined by ingenuity, resilience, and the extraordinary ability to turn the weight of the world into a spectacle of joy. In the court of a medieval king or queen, the jester's role was far more than mere amusement. While the flickering torchlight reflected off polished stone walls and golden candelabras, the jester's eyes constantly scanned the faces around him. Every frown, every raised eyebrow, every whisper carried meaning. To outsiders, the court might appear as a place of opulence, leisure, and ceremony, but beneath the grandeur was a world of constant tension, subtle power plays, and perilous politics. The jester lived at the heart of this web, a performer and observer in equal measure, tasked not only with entertaining, but with navigating a landscape where one misstep could be fatal. Unlike the carefree clowns we imagine in modern times, medieval jesters were walking a tightrope suspended over the volatile moods and capricious tempers of those in power. A single misjudged jest could have consequences far beyond embarrassment. Imagine delivering a clever remark about a noble's negligence, or a satirical song hinting at the king's poor decisions in battle. In another setting, it might elicit laughter and appreciation, but in the medieval court, it could be a spark for anger. Monarchs were human, and human emotions were unpredictable. One day, a king might be in a jovial mood, laughing at even the sharpest satire. The next, he could be brooding over political losses, court disputes, or personal grievances. The jester had to constantly gauge the temperature of the room, read subtle cues, and adapt in real time. Their survival depended not only on humor, but on social intelligence, on intuition, on an almost instinctive understanding of human behavior. The danger was ever present, but so was opportunity. Jesters were unique in their ability to speak truths that others could not. They could comment on corruption, highlight absurdities, or subtly criticize policies without the fear of immediate retribution. Provided their remarks were veiled in humor, this gave them a rare form of soft power. Monarchs sometimes listened to the jester's words with more attention than they did the counsel of their most trusted advisors. A cleverly crafted jest could influence decisions, sway opinions, or expose folly. It was a delicate game, however. Too blunt a joke, too clever a critique, and the jester could find themselves in dire trouble. Their influence was real, but it existed in a fragile, conditional state, always dependent on timing, tact, and the ruler's sense of humor. Consider the environment in which a jester operated. The medieval court was a microcosm of society's hierarchies, where every gesture, word, and expression was scrutinized. Nobles vied for favor, alliances shifted, and intrigue was constant. In such a setting, a jester's humor could act as a mirror, reflecting the absurdities of the court while masking the danger inherent in such reflections. A jest about a pompous lord might entertain some, but anger others. A song about the king's military failings might provoke laughter, but it might also attract suspicion. The jester was forced to weigh every performance against the complex social dynamics surrounding them. Their humor was both shield and weapon, tool and trap. The psychological pressure of this role cannot be overstated. Every day, the jester had to anticipate reactions before they occurred, weighing the potential for amusement against the risk of offense. This required extraordinary cognitive agility, emotional intelligence, and adaptability. One moment they might be performing a song that celebrates the king's victories, the next offering subtle criticism wrapped in rhyme or gesture. Their mind was constantly in motion, calculating, improvising, predicting outcomes, and managing impressions. It was a job that demanded constant vigilance and unceasing attention, far removed from the carefree image of the playful fool. In addition to mental strain, the jester often bore the brunt of physical risk. Some performances involved acrobatics, juggling, or even mock battles. Mistakes could result in injury, and there was little sympathy for failure. Beyond the stage, the court itself could be dangerous. Drunken nobles, unpredictable monarchs, or sudden outbreaks of violence meant that the jester needed to remain alert, even when not performing. Their livelihood depended on survival in an environment that was both entertaining and hazardous, a constant interplay of pleasure and peril. The jester's relationship with power was deeply paradoxical. On one hand, they were subservient, dependent on the whims of their ruler. On the other, they possessed a license to speak, a peculiar authority granted by their unique role. Some jesters leveraged this position to subtly influence political matters, advise rulers, or expose corruption. They operated in a space between visibility and invisibility, where their words could carry weight yet remain disguised as harmless humor. Yet even the most intelligent jester was never free from the shadow of potential danger. A failed joke or misinterpreted comment could lead to punishment, public humiliation, or exile. Their freedom was conditional, their safety temporary, and their power precarious. Historical records tell of jesters who navigated this treacherous space with remarkable skill. They used wordplay, satire, and mimicry to comment on court life, offering critiques that would otherwise be impossible. A jester might poke fun at the king's advisors, highlight injustice, or draw attention to the folly of a policy, all under the guise of entertainment. In doing so, they became vital instruments of insight within the court. Yet, their influence was always balanced by the risk of angering the wrong person, by the thin line separating wit from offense, cleverness from insult. The dynamic between jesters and rulers varied widely. Some monarchs enjoyed the sharp wit of their jesters, welcoming their observations and finding joy in their performances. Others were volatile, quick to anger, or suspicious of hidden messages in humor. A single misjudged remark in the presence of a capricious ruler could end a jester's career or even threaten their life. Survival required constant observation, an ability to read subtle social cues, and an almost preternatural sense of timing. Humor was not merely entertainment. It was a strategy for life itself. In addition to navigating the moods of the monarch, jesters also contended with the rivalries and jealousies of the court. Nobles often viewed jesters with suspicion, resentment, or envy. Their proximity to the ruler and their unique ability to influence through humor made them both valuable and threatening. A jester might be the subject of scheming, manipulation, or attempts to discredit them. Maintaining favor required skill not only in performance but in diplomacy, discretion, and social maneuvering. It was a constant test of intelligence, charm, and adaptability. The jester's life was also shaped by the unpredictability of fortune. Wealth and status were conditional, tied entirely to the goodwill of the court. One moment a jester might enjoy fine clothing, hearty meals, and the laughter of the nobility. The next, they could be dismissed, ignored, or ridiculed. The impermanence of their position created a life of uncertainty, requiring emotional resilience and practical ingenuity. Unlike nobles who could rely on inherited wealth or privilege, the jester's security was always contingent, their stability fleeting. Emotionally, the role demanded a complex blend of detachment and engagement. Jesters had to laugh at misfortune, find humor in tragedy, and transform serious matters into entertainment without losing the attention or approval of their audience. This required not only creativity, but an ability to manage inner emotional responses, a constant balancing act between authenticity and performance. They were performers in every sense, yet their performance extended beyond the stage into every aspect of court life, where observation, anticipation, and reaction were as important as acrobatics or song. Many historians suggest that the jester's intelligence and wit were their primary survival tools. The cleverness required to navigate courtly dangers, anticipate moods, and craft humor that was simultaneously entertaining and safe was extraordinary. They had to be psychologists, diplomats, and performers all at once, often without formal training, relying on instinct, observation, and experience. Their humor was a currency, a shield, and a weapon all rolled into one. Despite the risks, the position could offer unique rewards. A successful jester might earn the trust and favor of a monarch, gaining influence and even protection that others could not access. Some jesters became confidants, advisors, or subtle influencers within the court, their words shaping decisions behind the veil of entertainment. Yet these successes were exceptional, requiring extraordinary skill, judgment, and timing. For most, life remained a precarious balancing act, where every joke carried the weight of potential danger. In many ways, the medieval jester was a reflection of the court itself, unpredictable, precarious, and layered with complexity. They entertained, but they also exposed truths, reflected follies, and navigated a world of high stakes and subtle threats. Their skill was not measured merely in laughter, but in survival, in the ability to maintain position, influence, and favor amid the constant flux of power, mood, and politics. The jester's life was defined by a delicate balance: amusement and offense, visibility and vulnerability, intelligence and instinct. This balance, fragile and ever-shifting, was what made the jester's existence so uniquely perilous. They had to entertain, advise, observe, and survive, all while maintaining the illusion of effortless joy. The painted smile, the jingling bells, the acrobatics and songs all were tools of survival, methods to navigate the treacherous landscape of the medieval court. Behind every laugh elicited from the audience was a jester calculating, observing, and adapting, acutely aware of the precariousness of their position. The role demanded resilience, creativity, and extraordinary emotional intelligence. To succeed, jesters had to transform danger into opportunity, fear into performance, risk into humor. They were performers, diplomats, and survivalists rolled into one, living lives that were as psychologically demanding as they were physically taxing. The jester was not merely an entertainer, they were an observer of human nature, a subtle influencer, and a master of navigating the complex interplay of humor, power, and danger. By understanding the precarious life of a medieval jester, we gain insight into the nature of medieval courts themselves, unpredictable, hierarchical, and volatile. The jester's survival depended on reading people, anticipating moods, and crafting performances that entertained without offending. They lived at the intersection of humor and hazard, navigating a world in which laughter could be both a gift and a weapon. The medieval jester was, in many ways, the ultimate strategist. Their art was amusement, their battlefield the mind and mood of the court. Their victory measured not only in laughter, but in survival. In essence, the medieval jester was a master of balance. Their life was a continuous negotiation with power, an intricate dance of humor, observation, and adaptation. Each jest was a calculated risk, each performance a testament to skill and insight. They existed in a world where wit was as vital as swordsmanship, where laughter could save a life or imperil it. And though they are remembered today as symbols of fun and folly, their true story is one of extraordinary intelligence, resilience, and courage. To be a jester was to live on the edge of danger and delight, to survive in a court where the next laugh might secure favor or the next misstep might spell ruin. Life as a medieval jester was far from the carefree antics often imagined. The colorful costume, the jingling bells, the painted smile, these were not merely decorative. They were part of a survival toolkit, a public mask to hide the constant stress, vulnerability, and physical exhaustion that defined daily life. To truly understand the jester's experience, one must look beyond the humor, beyond the spectacle, and into the grueling reality of performance, social invisibility, and relentless demands that made their existence precarious in ways few could imagine. The physical hardships faced by jesters were extraordinary. Unlike the nobles they entertained, who dined, rested, and enjoyed the comforts of elaborate halls, jesters were constantly on the move. Their bodies were instruments, finely tuned to execute acrobatics, mimicry, juggling, and dancing, often under conditions that were exhausting and dangerous. Performances could last for hours, sometimes beginning early in the morning and stretching late into the night. The energy required to maintain a smile, to keep the audience engaged, and to execute physically demanding routines was immense. A single misstep in a tumble or juggling routine could result in serious injury, a broken limb, a twisted ankle, or worse, with no medical support beyond rudimentary remedies and chance recovery. Juggling, for instance, might appear whimsical and effortless, but it demanded constant focus, precision, and dexterity. An object dropped in front of the court could evoke laughter, yes, but often it risked humiliation or displeasure from the monarch. The performer had to transform any error into part of the act, turning potential embarrassment into entertainment, often while enduring pain from minor injuries that went untreated. Acrobatic stunts, flips, cartwheels, balancing acts placed relentless stress on the body. Without modern training methods, braces, or physiotherapy, a jester's career could be cut short by repeated strain, bruises, or accidents. Yet, despite the physical toll, they were expected to perform with unwavering energy, for hours at a time, in drafty stone halls, sometimes during feasts or ceremonies in freezing or sweltering conditions. Costumes added another layer of difficulty. Brightly colored and adorned with bells, tassels, and padded hats, the attire of a jester was visually striking but often heavy, restrictive, and uncomfortable. The bells jingled incessantly, creating noise that could distract from physical coordination. Tight, layered fabrics could restrict movement, and the constant wear could chafe the skin. On long days, the costume itself became a source of discomfort, yet it was essential to the jester's identity. Removing or neglecting the costume could risk losing the audience's attention, undermining the very performance that ensured their survival. Meals were not always plentiful or nutritious. While nobles feasted on roasted meats, pies, and imported delicacies, jesters were often given modest portions, sometimes leftovers from the banquet tables. Hunger and fatigue were constants, yet they were expected to maintain energy, wit, and performance stamina. Hydration was another challenge. Medieval halls could be hot and stuffy, yet water was often limited or unsafe, and jesters needed to remain alert and physically capable despite these deprivations. Exhaustion, hunger, and the physical demands of continuous performance created a level of strain that modern audiences might barely comprehend. Socially, the jester occupied an ambiguous, often isolating position. They were visible, performing in the center of attention, yet invisible in status. They were not servants in the traditional sense, but they were not equals to nobles, knights, or courtiers. Their proximity to power allowed them access to intimate spaces and private events, yet it also isolated them from meaningful connections. Relationships were largely transactional, laughter in exchange for survival, amusement in exchange for favor, wit in exchange for protection. True friendship, trust, or camaraderie within the court was rare. Even those who treated jesters kindly often did so out of utility or amusement rather than genuine regard. This social invisibility extended to family and community ties. Many jesters came from impoverished backgrounds, orphaned families, or distant lands. Some were recruited as children or adolescents, leaving home for the court with little support. Others were individuals who had fallen from social grace, relying entirely on the patronage of a monarch or noble. The jester's world was often solitary, defined by obligations to entertain and survive rather than to nurture personal connections. Loneliness and isolation were inherent, compounded by the need to constantly observe, assess, and adapt to the moods of others. The court itself could be unpredictable and even hostile. Drunken nobles, sudden disputes, and capricious monarchs meant that the jester's environment was fraught with danger. A jest could provoke laughter one moment and ire the next. A playful mimicry could be mistaken for disrespect, and a failed trick could lead to punishment. The jester's body and mind were always on alert, aware that an unguarded moment could have serious consequences. Their labor was physical, yes, but also psychological, a continuous negotiation of attention, favor, and safety. The jester's social standing also dictated interactions outside the court. They might be tolerated in public spaces, allowed entry into the king's chambers, or even celebrated for skill, yet their influence was fragile. They were rarely included in serious counsel or important decisions, and their value rested almost entirely on their ability to entertain. Other court members might ridicule or undermine them, seeking to discredit their influence or enjoy the novelty of a jester's humiliation. Even success at court did not guarantee respect. It simply prolonged their precarious existence. Physical hardship was compounded by exposure to environmental challenges. Castle halls were often drafty, cold in winter, and poorly lit. The jester performed on hard stone floors with uneven surfaces that made acrobatics and dance treacherous. Heat during summer feasts, combined with the weight of costume and exertion of performance, could lead to exhaustion, fainting, or injury. Yet their role demanded they maintain poise and energy, ensuring the audience's laughter and approval regardless of personal discomfort. There was no break, no rest from the performance, and little opportunity for care or recovery when illness or injury struck. The jesters' emotional and mental burdens were equally taxing. They were often required to mock the serious, the tragic, or the sacred, converting hardship into laughter for the amusement of the powerful. They might craft songs that satirized politics, war, or misfortune, requiring an emotional detachment that was difficult to maintain. This skill to engage with suffering creatively, transforming it into entertainment, demanded high levels of cognitive flexibility, emotional resilience, and mental stamina. Repeated exposure to such pressures could create psychological strain, a form of early occupational stress unique to their position. Furthermore, jesters had to maintain constant vigilance in their social interactions. They were often tasked with testing the boundaries of humor, exploring sensitive topics, and pushing limits to entertain and influence. Yet these limits were invisible, shifting with the ruler's mood, the court's politics, or the personal grievances of nobles. Misjudging a joke or a gesture could result in punishment, loss of position, or worse. They were expected to be fearless, witty, and clever, yet constantly aware of the potential dangers in every interaction. Even leisure was limited. While nobles enjoyed games, hunting, and socializing, the jester's downtime was often consumed by preparation, rehearsal, or observation. They studied the court, learned the habits and moods of those around them, and developed strategies to ensure their next performance would succeed. Unlike the entertainment itself, which seemed effortless to the audience, the preparation was laborious, mentally and physically taxing, and demanded discipline and foresight. In some cases, jesters also faced personal exploitation. Wealthy or corrupt nobles might demand additional performances, humiliating tasks, or labor beyond the scope of entertainment. A jest might be required to perform in unsafe conditions, endure ridicule, or engage in acts of self-deprecation to appease patrons. They were highly visible yet powerless in many ways, a combination that increased both the risk of harm and the demand for resilience. Despite these hardships, some jesters developed strategies for survival. They cultivated charm, wit, and observation skills that allowed them to navigate the court's dangers. They learned when to provoke laughter and when to hold back, how to redirect criticism through humor, and how to manage social alliances. Success depended not merely on performance skill, but on an intricate understanding of human behavior, timing, and psychology. The ability to read a room, anticipate reactions, and adjust in real time was as essential as physical agility or musical talent. Yet even mastery could not guarantee safety. The jester's fortunes were intertwined with the mercurial moods of rulers and the unpredictable dynamics of court life. Favor could vanish overnight. Allies could turn into rivals. A jest misinterpreted could undo years of careful survival. The physical demands, social invisibility, and psychological strain combined to create a life defined by uncertainty, risk, and relentless effort. To endure this life required extraordinary resilience. Jesters were performers, survivors, and social strategists simultaneously. They transformed vulnerability into spectacle, stress into performance, and danger into opportunity. Their survival depended on physical dexterity, mental acuity, emotional regulation, and social intelligence. The role demanded constant adaptation and vigilance, ensuring that every joke, gesture, and performance reinforced their position while minimizing the risk of offense or harm. In essence, the medieval jester's life was a paradox of visibility and vulnerability. They were central to the court's entertainment, occupying the attention of kings and queens, yet socially marginal, isolated, and precarious. Their bodies bore the strain of performance, their minds navigated political and social hazards, and their spirits endured the emotional toll of constant observation and judgment. They existed in a world where applause was currency, laughter was protection, and a single misstep could end it all. Despite the hardships, some jesters achieved remarkable influence. They used their position to observe, critique, and guide, turning humor into a subtle form of power. Their ability to survive physical exhaustion, social invisibility, and psychological strain while performing for the amusement of the powerful is a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and adaptability. They were entertainers, diplomats, and strategists rolled into one, mastering the art of survival in a world defined by hierarchy, danger, and performance. By examining the physical and social hardships of the medieval jester, we gain insight into the broader society they inhabited. The jester's existence highlights the fragility of status, the demands of performance, and the interplay of power and survival in medieval courts. It also reminds us that behind the painted smile, jingling bells, and acrobatic feats lay a life defined by discipline, vigilance, and endurance. Their role was both extraordinary and exhausting, a continuous negotiation between spectacle and survival. In the end, the medieval jester was a figure of paradox, celebrated yet marginalized, visible yet isolated, physically taxed yet mentally alert, humorously brilliant yet emotionally burdened. Their life required mastery of body, mind, and social dynamics, a combination that few could sustain. And while history remembers them for laughter, entertainment, and audacity, the reality of their existence was a delicate, exhausting, and often perilous balancing act, where every day was a testament to resilience, creativity, and survival against the odds. In the courts of medieval Europe, laughter was both a currency and a weapon. The jester, a figure often portrayed in bright colors and jingling bells, was the ultimate arbiter of humor, a professional tasked with converting even the gravest misfortunes into amusement. But behind the painted smile and playful antics lay a world that was far darker than most modern depictions suggest. The jester's humor, their jokes, songs, and performances existed within a complex ecosystem of danger, power, and constant scrutiny. The court was not merely a place of festivity and entertainment. It was a battlefield of personalities, egos, and unspoken rules. And the jester, for all their wit and cleverness, was always navigating the perilous line between amusement and offense, safety and ruin. Humor in the medieval court was never neutral. It had purpose, consequence, and power. A jest could amuse a king, lighten the mood after a battle, or entertain guests during a feast. Yet that same jest, if misjudged, could provoke the wrath of a noble, the displeasure of a queen, or the dangerous suspicion of a monarch. The jester's position was unique in that they were allowed to speak truths in the form of comedy, but this license was fragile. The monarch's sense of humor, easily swayed by mood, health, and politics, dictated the boundaries of permissible jest. One day, a particular joke might elicit roaring laughter. The next, the same joke could be interpreted as insult, betrayal, or subversion. Court was a living, breathing entity, unpredictable and volatile, and the jester moved through it with both skill and caution, acutely aware that the margin for error was narrow. Many of the topics jesters were expected to address were themselves fraught with danger. Political failures, military defeats, rivalries among nobles, and the missteps of monarchs could all become material for comedy. But making light of such matters required extraordinary sensitivity and timing. A song mocking a failed siege, for example, could amuse one noble while deeply offending another. A clever parody of a rival lord's vanity could entertain the king, but simultaneously incite the enmity of powerful courtiers. The jester's art was therefore an intricate negotiation, balancing wit, timing, and diplomacy. Humor was not merely entertainment, it was survival, a tool to navigate the treacherous waters of courtly life. The consequences of misjudgment could be severe. Historical accounts suggest that some jesters suffered punishment or even execution when their humor crossed the unseen boundaries of taste or respect. Monarchs were human, and humans could be mercurial. A ruler in good spirits might welcome the sharpest satire, laughing heartily at mockery aimed at themselves or their advisors. Yet the same ruler, on a day shadowed by personal loss, political failure, or illness, could perceive that humor as insolence. Jesters had to internalize an acute sense of timing, mood, and perception, constantly analyzing the faces around them, reading gestures, listening for shifts in tone, and adjusting their performance in real time. One lapse could destroy years of careful survival. Jesters also had to endure the physical dangers of performance while navigating these social hazards. Acrobatics, juggling, and elaborate gestures were not only tiring, but often risky. Castle halls were not designed for safe stunts. Stone floors were unforgiving, ceilings could be low, and torches or open flames posed constant hazards. Mistakes could result in bruises, sprains, or worse. In addition, some performances demanded extreme contortions, forced laughter, or mock fights, which placed the jester's body under relentless strain. Despite these dangers, the audience expected flawless execution, and the performer's safety was secondary to the entertainment of the court. The physical and social pressures combined to create a life that was both exhausting and perilous, a constant negotiation of risk and reward. The jester's humor also required an intimate engagement with tragedy, suffering, and human folly. They were often tasked with transforming serious events into entertainment. Battles, deaths, political failures, and social injustices could all become fodder for performance. This required not only creativity, but emotional detachment, a capacity to observe and manipulate serious subjects without becoming overwhelmed. The act of turning sorrow or misfortune into amusement demanded psychological resilience. They were, in effect, mediators of emotion, converting the gravity of the world into laughter for those who wielded power. This skill was invaluable, yet it came at the cost of repeated exposure to stress and a subtle erosion of personal boundaries, as the jester learned to suppress empathy in favor of performance. Practical jokes, mockery, and performance also carried the risk of provoking violence. Nobles, intoxicated or emboldened by privilege, could interpret jest as insolence. Mock battles could escalate, mimicry could offend, and an ill-timed joke could lead to physical assault or public humiliation. In some courts, a jester's role included enduring humiliating pranks from nobles themselves, further blurring the line between performer and victim. They were expected to absorb ridicule gracefully, to convert insult into entertainment, and to survive in a world where humor was both weapon and shield. Despite these dangers, some jesters wielded their humor as a form of subtle influence. Clever observation, disguised as comedy, allowed them to comment on policies, expose corruption, or highlight the absurdity of courtly behavior. A jester could deliver criticism in rhyme or gesture, making it digestible to a monarch who might otherwise reject blunt counsel. Their insights, cloaked in laughter, could shape decisions, protect allies, or warn of impending dangers. Yet this influence was tenuous, dependent on careful execution, impeccable timing, and a nuanced understanding of the audience. Even the most intelligent jester faced the constant risk that a joke would misfire, resulting in disfavor or punishment. The dynamics of court politics amplified the danger. Courtiers often viewed the jester with a mix of suspicion, envy, and fear. They were outsiders, yet they occupied a space close to the monarch, able to deliver sharp commentary without immediate consequence. Their proximity to power made them targets for intrigue. Other courtiers might attempt to discredit a jester, spread rumors, or provoke them into offending the king or queen. Alliances were fragile, and the jester had to navigate these social networks with extraordinary skill. Humor became a means of survival, a tool for negotiation, and sometimes a weapon against those who sought to harm them. The unpredictability of the court environment also demanded constant vigilance. Monarchs could be capricious, guests could be drunk or quarrelsome, and the mood of the hall could shift in an instant. A jest that delighted one moment could trigger outrage the next. The jester had to be constantly aware, able to improvise, redirect attention, and adjust performance on the fly. This required not only creativity and intelligence, but also an almost instinctive sense of human behavior, a finely tuned radar for social cues and emotional undercurrents. Every performance was both a test of skill and a negotiation with danger. Moreover, jesters often bore the emotional labor of their role in ways that were rarely recognized. They were expected to maintain composure, charm, and wit even in moments of personal distress or fear. The constant exposure to risk, insult, and humiliation required a resilience that extended beyond the physical. They had to manage fear, disappointment, and anxiety while projecting joy and confidence. Their humor became a mask, concealing vulnerability and reinforcing survival. The capacity to endure such pressures was extraordinary, and it highlights the human cost behind the laughter that echoed through castle halls. In addition to social and emotional hazards, jesters frequently faced moral dilemmas. The act of transforming tragedy, injustice, or human suffering into entertainment was not without ethical complexity. They were required to mock serious issues, exploit weaknesses, and make light of circumstances that, in any other context, might demand solemnity. Balancing humor with sensitivity, amusement with insight, was a constant challenge. A jester who failed to navigate these dilemmas risked alienating the court, damaging relationships, or provoking offense. Their art was not purely entertainment. It was a sophisticated, high-stakes negotiation with emotion, morality, and social expectation. Even successful jesters were not immune to danger. Historical accounts indicate that some enjoyed relative protection and influence, yet this status was always conditional. Favor could evaporate overnight. Monarchs' moods changed, political landscapes shifted, and a single poorly timed jest could undo years of careful strategy. Their success required constant adaptation, learning, and observation, ensuring that their performance remained relevant, entertaining, and safe. Every act was simultaneously a risk and an opportunity, a delicate balance maintained by skill, intuition, and courage. The dark side of the jester's role also extended to the psychological toll of constant observation. They lived under scrutiny at all times, their words, gestures, and expressions analyzed for meaning. Every action could be interpreted as insight, insult, or subversion. This relentless pressure demanded mental agility, emotional regulation, and strategic thinking. The jester was a performer not only for entertainment but for survival, a position requiring continual negotiation with the complex dynamics of power, perception, and expectation. Furthermore, the court's environment amplified the stakes of performance. Feasts were occasions of competition, display, and political signaling. A joke in the wrong moment could disrupt alliances, provoke rivalries, or reveal vulnerabilities. The jester's skill lay in navigating these treacherous waters, converting potential dangers into amusement, and using humor as a form of subtle diplomacy. They were entertainers, but they were also analysts, negotiators, and observers, constantly interpreting social currents and responding with calculated precision. The combination of physical risk, social invisibility, emotional labor, and moral complexity created a life of intense challenge. Jesters were uniquely positioned at the intersection of humor, power, and danger. Their laughter was both a tool and a shield, their performance a means of survival, and their insight a subtle form of influence. Yet every success was precarious, every jest a negotiation with potential peril, and every day a test of skill, intelligence, and resilience. Despite these dangers, some jesters thrived, demonstrating the extraordinary ingenuity required to succeed. They learned to read moods, anticipate reactions, and craft performances that entertained while protecting their position. They developed strategies to redirect offense, deflect criticism, and maintain favor. Their ability to combine physical skill, mental acuity, and emotional intelligence allowed them to navigate a world defined by uncertainty, volatility, and high stakes. Yet even the most adept jester could never fully escape the inherent risks of their profession. The medieval jester's life, therefore, was defined by paradox. They were both central and marginal, powerful and vulnerable, visible and invisible. Humor was their craft, their survival strategy, and their shield, but it was also a source of danger, scrutiny, and potential ruin. To succeed required a mastery of art, psychology, and social navigation, as well as extraordinary resilience in the face of constant risk. The painted smile, the jingling bells, and the acrobatics were outward signs of performance, masking the underlying pressures, threats, and complexities of daily life. In essence, the jester lived in a world where amusement could be deadly, insight could provoke ire, and performance was a matter of survival. Their role demanded intelligence, courage, and adaptability of the highest order. The dark side of court humor was ever present, and the jester's life was a continuous negotiation with danger, favor, and the caprices of those in power. Their laughter, so central to the court's culture, was simultaneously a weapon, a shield, and a lifeline, protecting them in a world that was both exhilarating and perilous. Amid the bright colors, jingling bells, and painted smiles of the medieval court, the jester may have appeared to be nothing more than a source of amusement, a whimsical figure whose purpose was to make the powerful laugh. Yet beneath the surface of jest and spectacle lay a subtle, often overlooked form of influence. The jester was uniquely positioned in the hierarchy of the court, operating at the intersection of visibility and invisibility, entertainment and insight, humor and strategy. While their outward role was to entertain, their inward role was far more complex. They could observe, advise, and influence in ways unavailable to most courtiers or even trusted advisors. This hidden power, earned through skill, intellect, and social acuity, allowed jesters to shape the court subtly, often without anyone realizing it. The medieval jester's influence began with observation. Unlike nobles, advisors, and officials who were often preoccupied with status, politics, or protocol, the jester's function required close attention to the behavior of those around them. They watched the king or queen, noting moods, gestures, and reactions. They observed courtiers, deciphering rivalries, alliances, and ambitions. They listened to whispers, studied facial expressions, and recorded the nuances of conversation. Every laugh, sigh, or glance became data, a source of understanding that could later inform performance or advice. This constant observation was not passive, it was an active, deliberate form of intelligence, gathering that placed the jester in a position of unique insight. This insight allowed the jester to act as an informal counselor. Monarchs often valued the jester's perspective precisely because it was delivered through humor. A pointed joke, a clever rhyme, or a satirical performance could illuminate truths that direct advice could not. By framing critique as entertainment, the jester could bypass defensive reactions and provide guidance subtly. They might highlight the folly of a noble's plan, the inefficiency of an advisor, or the potential consequences of a political decision. This indirect influence allowed rulers to hear difficult truths while maintaining the appearance of impartiality and amusement. The jester's words were protected by humor, a shield that transformed criticism into insight, allowing them to wield power without appearing threatening. In some cases, jesters became trusted confidants. Their proximity to the monarch and their unique ability to speak in ways others could not allow them access to private spaces and conversations. A clever jester could advise, caution, or redirect decisions in ways that shaped the court's trajectory. Their humor was a vehicle for influence. A satirical song could reveal incompetence among officials. A playful mimicry could expose vanity or pride, and a clever anecdote could suggest alternative courses of action. While their authority was informal and always conditional, it was real, and a skilled jester could leverage it to protect themselves, allies, and sometimes even the broader interests of the court. The power of the jester also lay in social intelligence. They had to navigate complex hierarchies, manage perceptions, and maintain alliances, while entertaining audiences that included both rulers and rivals. Understanding the subtleties of human behavior allowed the jester to intervene strategically, diffusing tension, redirecting conflict, or subtly influencing decisions. Humor became a tool not just for amusement, but for diplomacy. A well-timed joke could diffuse hostility between feuding nobles. A satirical rhyme could highlight the absurdity of a dispute, and a clever performance could draw attention away from a sensitive issue. Through these interventions, the jester exercised influence that was often invisible but deeply effective. Some jesters were also skilled manipulators of perception. They could amplify strengths, mask weaknesses, or reshape reputations through performance. A noble who feared ridicule might be persuaded to act with caution. A monarch might be made aware of blind spots in policy, and the audience might be subtly guided to view events or people differently. The jester's artistry lay in persuasion without coercion, shaping opinions and behaviors through entertainment. Unlike formal advisors, whose words could provoke resistance or debate, the jester's influence was gentle, indirect, and often disguised as humor, making it both powerful and safe. The psychological insight of a jester was another form of power. By understanding motivations, fears, and desires, the jester could craft performances that resonated deeply with the court. They could appeal to vanity, ego, or pride, using humor to influence decisions and behavior. This was not mere manipulation. It was a form of applied psychology, leveraging understanding of human nature to achieve outcomes favorable to both themselves and, in some cases, the ruler. Monarchs often recognized this skill, valuing jesters not only for entertainment, but for their uncanny ability to navigate complex social dynamics and reveal truths in a form that was both acceptable and persuasive. The hidden power of the jester also extended to political safety. By observing carefully and speaking cleverly, they could identify threats, anticipate conflicts, and act as intermediaries. In a court where alliances shifted rapidly and rivalries were intense, a jester who understood the personalities and ambitions of nobles could serve as a subtle advisor, helping to prevent disputes from escalating. Humor allowed them to test boundaries, probe reactions, and assess intentions without creating offense. In this sense, the jester's insight was not only influential but protective, allowing them to navigate danger while shaping the court's dynamics in subtle ways. Some historical accounts highlight jesters who exercised extraordinary influence. They advised monarchs, guided policy indirectly, and became central figures in court life. Their intelligence, observation skills, and social acumen made them indispensable in ways that were often hidden behind performance. They could shape decisions, protect allies, and even influence political outcomes, all while appearing as mere entertainers. This dual role of performer and strategist was unique, giving the jester a form of power that was informal yet effective, visible yet unacknowledged. The jester's ability to manage perception was crucial to their influence. They had to appear harmless, amusing, and self-deprecating while simultaneously gathering intelligence, interpreting social cues, and crafting performances that could shape behavior. This required extraordinary cognitive and emotional skill. Every gesture, word, and joke was calibrated to entertain and protect, to amuse and influence. They were constantly performing multiple roles at once: entertainer, observer, counselor, and diplomat, often without formal recognition or authority. Their power was subtle, indirect, and reliant on skillful execution. Humor itself was a potent instrument of influence. A jester's ability to make the powerful laugh granted them access to spaces and conversations unavailable to most others. Laughter lowered defenses, making rulers more receptive to ideas and insights. By disguising critique as comedy, jesters could highlight errors, question decisions, and reveal truths without provoking anger. The ability to blend amusement with guidance transformed their role from mere entertainment to a form of soft power, one that could subtly shape courtly life, influence decisions, and protect the jester from the hazards of direct confrontation. The hidden power of the jester was also tied to creativity. Their performances required innovation, improvisation, and adaptability. Each audience, each court, and each monarch presented unique challenges. A jester who could quickly adapt to new personalities, moods, and situations gained a level of influence unmatched by formal advisors. They could turn potential offense into laughter, redirect attention from conflict, and subtly guide social interactions. Creativity, therefore, was not only a tool for amusement, but a mechanism for survival and influence. Furthermore, jesters often possessed remarkable memory and knowledge. They remembered court events, rivalries, and precedents, using this information to craft performances that were both entertaining and insightful. Their knowledge of history, literature, and human behavior allowed them to tailor humor to resonate with specific audiences. This intellectual aspect of their role amplified their influence, allowing them to navigate complex social and political landscapes with skill. Knowledge, observation, and wit combined to create a form of power that was informal, subtle, yet highly effective. The interplay between vulnerability and influence defined the jester's existence. They were constantly at risk physically, socially, and politically, yet their skills, intelligence, and insight allowed them to exercise influence in ways inaccessible to others. By converting danger into entertainment, observation into advice, and humor into persuasion, jesters wielded a form of soft power that was both remarkable and precarious. Their influence was invisible in its subtlety, yet tangible in its effects on court dynamics, decision-making, and social interaction. Despite this influence, the jester's position remained inherently fragile. Favor could be lost, moods could shift, and alliances could change overnight. The very tools that granted power, humor, observation, and insight also carried risk. A misjudged joke, a misunderstood comment, or a poorly timed performance could erode influence, provoke offense, or threaten survival. The jester's power was therefore always conditional, contingent on skill, perception, and the mercurial nature of courtly life. Yet it was precisely this conditionality that made their achievements remarkable. A jester who navigated the court successfully demonstrated extraordinary intelligence, resilience, and creativity. They transformed marginalization into opportunity, vulnerability into influence, and entertainment into subtle power. Their lives illustrate the profound ways in which insight, observation, and performance can intersect to create influence, even in contexts dominated by hierarchy, risk, and uncertainty. In essence, the medieval jester was far more than a source of amusement. They were observers, strategists, and subtle influencers, operating at the intersection of humor, insight, and survival. Their hidden power lay in their ability to entertain while gathering intelligence, advise while amusing, and navigate danger while shaping perception. They were central to the life of the court in ways often invisible, wielding influence that depended not on formal authority, but on skill, creativity, and psychological insight. The legacy of the jester reminds us that power is not always formal or overt. Influence can be exercised subtly through observation, humor, and understanding of human behavior. The jester's role demonstrates how creativity, intelligence, and social acuity can transform marginality into authority, and how survival and influence are deeply intertwined. Their life was one of constant negotiation, skill, and adaptation, where laughter served not only as entertainment, but as a form of soft power, protection, and subtle guidance. By examining the hidden power of the jester, we gain insight into both the dynamics of medieval courts and the nature of influence itself. The jester's capacity to observe, advise, and guide through humor reflects a sophisticated understanding of human psychology, social interaction, and political strategy. They were entertainers, yes, but they were also masters of subtle persuasion, navigating a world of risk and opportunity with intelligence, courage, and creativity. Ultimately, the medieval jester exemplifies a form of influence that is often overlooked: the power of wit, observation, and subtlety. Their life illustrates the delicate balance between amusement and insight, entertainment and guidance, vulnerability and authority. Through their performances, they shaped perception, influenced decisions, and navigated a perilous world with skill that was both extraordinary and underappreciated. The hidden power of the jester was not merely in the laughter they inspired, but in the strategic, intelligent, and courageous ways they wielded that laughter to survive, thrive, and influence the world around them. The life of a medieval jester, with all its color, movement, and laughter, was at its core defined by trade, offs, while the court offered proximity to power, a platform for influence, and moments of admiration. It also demanded relentless labor, emotional resilience, and constant vigilance. Every performance, every word, and every gesture carried weight far beyond the amusement of the audience. Survival required more than cleverness or athletic skill. It demanded an understanding of human nature, political acuity, and the ability to mask vulnerability behind a facade of humor. For every moment of laughter, there existed the potential for catastrophe. The cost of a misstep, a misunderstood jest, or the loss of favor was high, sometimes fatal. The most immediate price was physical. The jester's body was their primary instrument, and the demands placed upon it were extraordinary. They were expected to perform acrobatics, juggling, dancing, mock battles, and mimetic performances with precision, grace, and energy, often for hours at a time. Mistakes could result in bruises, sprains, broken bones, or more severe injury. These injuries were compounded by the harsh conditions of medieval castles: cold stone floors, drafty halls, open flames, and uneven surfaces presented constant hazards. Unlike modern performers, medieval jesters had little access to medical care. A sprained ankle or a twisted wrist might heal slowly, painfully, and incompletely, affecting performance and jeopardizing income and safety. They were acrobats, dancers, musicians, and comedians without the protections of modern training, equipment, or medical knowledge, making physical risk an inseparable part of their profession. Beyond physical danger, the emotional and psychological costs were profound. Jesters existed in a world of constant scrutiny and judgment. Every expression, gesture, and word was analyzed for meaning, potential offense, or hidden critique. They had to maintain a persona of lightheartedness and amusement even while navigating fear, uncertainty, and exhaustion. Emotional labor was relentless. The jester transformed internal stress, anxiety, and even grief into outward humor for the amusement of the powerful. Over time, the constant suppression of vulnerability and the need to mask true emotions could lead to psychological strain. The balance between authenticity and performance was delicate and taxing, and the jester lived continuously on the edge between engagement and detachment. Social isolation compounded these pressures. Despite their visibility and centrality in court life, jesters were often outsiders. They were not equals to nobles, knights, or advisors, and their interactions with peers were limited by their marginal status. Relationships within the court were transactional, based on entertainment and favor rather than genuine connection. Friendships were rare, trust was difficult to establish, and alliances were fragile. Even when a jester achieved influence, it was dependent on skillful navigation of personalities, moods, and politics. Proximity to power provided opportunity, but also magnified exposure to risk, envy, and intrigue. The social isolation of the jester was a constant undercurrent, shaping daily existence and limiting sources of emotional support. Economic precarity was another cost. Unlike nobles who inherited wealth and status, jesters depended entirely on patronage. Income, food, clothing, and safety were contingent on favor, which could change with the monarch's mood or the court's politics. Disfavor could lead to dismissal, poverty, or even threats to personal safety. Some courts provided sustenance and lodging, but these were privileges tied to performance and amusement rather than rights. The conditional nature of this support meant that the jester's livelihood was always precarious, requiring constant effort, cleverness, and vigilance. A day without laughter could be a day of danger, and every joke carried the weight of potential consequences. The risks were not solely related to offense or failure in performance. Jesters were exposed to the intrigues, rivalries, and volatile temperaments of the court. They witnessed the ambitions of nobles, the secretive alliances, and the personal vendettas that defined court life. Because they were in close proximity to power, they could become inadvertent participants in schemes or scapegoats for perceived failures. A jester who joked about a noble's vanity or incompetence could provoke retaliation, and even the most skillful performance could backfire if interpreted as subversion or insolence. The stakes of social and political misjudgment were high, with consequences ranging from humiliation to expulsion or death. Monarchs themselves were unpredictable. The same ruler who laughed heartily at satire one day could interpret it as disrespect the next. Illness, personal loss, political pressure, or even mood swings could transform humor into offense. Jesters had to be adept at reading subtle cues, facial expressions, gestures, tones of voice to anticipate the monarch's reactions and adjust accordingly. This perpetual mental vigilance was exhausting, requiring the jester to remain alert, agile, and responsive at all times. Their skill was not only in the art of performance, but in the constant management of perception, a psychological tightrope walk in which one false step could have dire consequences. The emotional toll of this vigilance extended to interactions with others. Courtiers were rarely allies. Envy, competition, and resentment were commonplace. Jesters,